The gavel froze mid-air in Judge Margaret O'Sullivan's weathered hand, her 40 years of courtroom experience evaporating in an instant as 600 pounds of black bear padded through the mahogany doors. Gasps erupted like gunshots across the packed Asheville courthouse, bailiffs reaching for weapons, reporters scrambling over wooden benches in a chaos of clicking cameras and terrified whispers. But 4-year-old Emma Grace Thompson didn't run. The tiny girl with tangled blonde curls walked steadily toward the massive predator, her small hand outstretched while grown men cowered behind oak railings. District Attorney Sarah Mitchell watched in frozen horror as Emma placed her palm against the bear's snout and whispered words that shattered 2 years of silence. "Hello, Bruno. Tell them what you saw that night." The courtroom fell into suffocating quiet, broken only by the gentle rumble of the bear settling beside the child like an ancient guardian. Judge O'Sullivan's voice cracked. "Dear God, what have we done?" How could a voiceless little girl and a wild beast hold the key to justice itself? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 2 years earlier, the mountain town of Asheville had been rocked by a tragedy that would haunt its residents forever. Grace Thompson, a gentle 28-year-old elementary school teacher, had been brutally murdered in her father's cabin while trying to escape an abusive relationship. The only witness was her 4-year-old daughter Emma, who had watched from a bedroom closet as Jake Morrison, Grace's ex-boyfriend, struck her mother down with a fireplace poker. Since that horrific night, Emma Grace Thompson had not spoken a single word. She lived now with her grandfather, Henry "Hank" Thompson, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran whose own battle scars ran deep beneath his weathered exterior. Hank's modest home on Sunset Ridge overlooked the Blue Ridge Mountains, where autumn leaves painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and golds, a beauty that seemed to mock the darkness that had settled over their lives. "She just draws and draws," Hank would tell anyone who asked about his granddaughter's condition. Emma's bedroom walls were covered with crayon sketches, dark figures, broken furniture, and always, always, a small girl hiding in shadows. Child psychologists had tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, even hypnosis. Nothing could unlock the prison of silence that had claimed the bright, chattering little girl who once filled the house with laughter. The breakthrough came through Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a pioneering animal therapist from the University of North Carolina. Dr. Martinez had been working with Bruno, a 4-year-old American black bear who had his own tragic backstory. Bruno had been found as a 6-month-old cub, crying beside his mother's body after she was killed by an illegal poacher. Rescued by the state wildlife department, Bruno had been raised in captivity and trained as part of an experimental therapy program for trauma victims. "Emma and Bruno share something most people can't understand," Dr. Martinez had explained to the skeptical courtroom 2 weeks ago. "They've both lost their mothers to violence. They both carry wounds that words can't heal." Judge Margaret O'Sullivan, nearing retirement after 4 decades on the bench, had never faced such an unprecedented request. The Irish-American jurist, known for her stern but compassionate rulings, had wrestled with the decision for days. At 67, she had presided over thousands of cases, but none had stirred the maternal instincts she thought had long since been buried by her inability to have children of her own. The prosecution was led by Sarah Mitchell, a 42-year-old career prosecutor whose dedication to justice had cost her any semblance of a personal life. Sarah saw in Emma the daughter she had sacrificed for her profession, and in this case, perhaps her last chance to make that sacrifice meaningful. Standing opposite was Marcus Webb, a prestigious defense attorney whose silver hair and expensive suits masked a darkness that no one in the courtroom suspected. Webb had built his reputation defending the powerful and corrupt, but his motivation for taking Jake Morrison's case ran deeper than professional obligation. It was personal. rooted in a hatred that would soon consume everything in its path. The inciting incident had begun on a bitter February evening 2 years prior, when Grace Thompson packed her daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit and fled to her father's isolated cabin in the mountains. She had finally found the courage to leave Jake Morrison after he had put her in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a concussion that left her dizzy for weeks. "Daddy, I can't take it anymore," Grace had whispered into the phone, her voice shaking as Emma played quietly in the background. "He said he'll kill me if I try to leave again. I believe him this time." Hank Thompson had served 2 tours in Vietnam and survived things that would break most men, but nothing had prepared him for the terror in his daughter's voice. "Come home, Gracie," he had said, using her childhood nickname. "I'll keep you both safe." The cabin sat 15 miles outside Asheville, accessible only by a winding gravel road that snaked through dense pine forests. It had been Hank's retreat for decades, a place where he could find peace from the nightmares that still visited him from the war. The rustic 2-bedroom structure had no neighbors for miles, making it the perfect sanctuary, or so they thought. Grace had been careful. She had taken only cash from her savings account, left her cell phone behind, and told no one except her father where she was going. For 3 days, she and Emma had lived like they were on a camping adventure. They built pillow forts in the living room, made hot chocolate by the fireplace, and Emma had giggled as her mother read stories in funny voices. But Jake Morrison had connections Grace didn't know about. His brother-in-law worked for a prestigious law firm that specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Within 72 hours, Jake knew exactly where Grace had taken his property, as he called Emma in his more violent moments. The attack came at 8:47 p.m. on February 14th, Valentine's Day, a cruel irony that would haunt Hank forever. Grace had been reading Emma a bedtime story when they heard the truck rumbling up the gravel driveway. Grace's face went white as she recognized the sound of Jake's diesel engine. "Emma, sweetheart, we're going to play hide and seek," Grace said, her voice forced calm despite the terror clawing at her throat. "I want you to go hide in the bedroom closet and don't come out until Grandpa Hank comes home, okay? No matter what you hear, you stay hidden." 4-year-old Emma, sensing her mother's fear but trusting completely, had nodded solemnly and scampered to the back bedroom. She squeezed herself behind the hanging clothes, clutching her stuffed rabbit as she peered through the wooden slats of the closet door. Jake's entrance was explosive. He kicked in the front door so hard it slammed against the wall, leaving a permanent dent in the knotty pine paneling. "Where the hell do you think you're going, Grace?" he bellowed, his massive frame filling the doorway. At 6'4" and 250 pounds, Jake Morrison was an intimidating presence even when sober. Tonight he reeked of whiskey and rage. "Jake, please," Grace pleaded, backing toward the fireplace. "Emma's sleeping. Don't wake her up." "Don't tell me what to do in front of my kid," Jake snarled, advancing on her. "You think you can just disappear with her? Make me look like a fool?" From her hiding place, Emma watched in frozen terror as the man who had hurt her mother so many times before grabbed Grace by the hair and shook her like a rag doll. The fireplace poker, a heavy iron rod that Hank used to tend the logs, sat within Jake's reach. "You're never leaving me again," Jake growled, his meaty fist connecting with Grace's jaw with a sickening crack. "Nobody leaves Jake Morrison." Grace fell to her knees, blood streaming from her nose, but her eyes remained fixed on the bedroom door where her daughter was hidden. "Please, Jake. I'll come back. Just don't hurt Emma." But Jake was beyond reasoning. Years of steroids and alcohol had warped his mind into something barely human. He grabbed the poker, testing its weight in his hands as Grace scrambled backward on the wooden floor. "You should have thought about that before you humiliated me," he said, raising the iron rod above his head. The impact echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Emma bit down on her rabbit's ear to keep from screaming as her mother's body went limp on the braided rug their grandmother had made decades ago. Jake stood over Grace for a long moment, breathing heavily, before beginning to search the cabin room by room. Emma had never been so terrified in her short life, but she obeyed her mother's final command. She stayed hidden in that closet for 6 hours, until Hank's truck finally pulled into the driveway and his anguished cries shattered the mountain silence forever. The turning point arrived on a crisp October morning when Dr. Rebecca Martinez led Bruno through the heavy oak doors of the Buncombe County Courthouse. The massive black bear moved with surprising grace for his 600-pound frame, his dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment with intelligent wariness. Behind him, a trail of protesters had gathered outside, their signs reading, "Bears don't belong in courtrooms," and "Protect our children from wild animals." Judge Margaret O'Sullivan had spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with her decision to allow this unprecedented experiment. The legal precedent was non-existent. The liability concerns were staggering, and half the town thought she had lost her mind. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma's haunting drawings and remembered her own childless decades on the bench, wondering if she had ever truly served justice for the voiceless. "Dr. Martinez," the judge said as the courtroom fell into hushed whispers, "I want to be absolutely clear about the conditions of this arrangement. At the first sign of aggressive behavior from this animal, these proceedings will be terminated immediately." "Understood, Your Honor," Dr. Martinez replied, her calm demeanor belying the years of preparation that had led to this moment. "Bruno has been working with trauma victims for 18 months. He's never shown aggression toward a human, particularly children." The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Local news crews had set up cameras in the back rows, while concerned citizens filled every available seat. Many had come to witness what they believed would be either a groundbreaking moment in judicial history or a catastrophic disaster that would end careers and possibly lives. Emma sat in the front row beside her grandfather Hank, her small frame dwarfed by the formal surroundings. She wore a pale blue dress that Hank had bought specifically for the trial, and her blonde hair had been carefully braided by their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. For 2 years, Emma had been a ghost of herself, communicating only through nods, headshakes, and those disturbing crayon drawings that covered every surface of Hank's refrigerator. When Bruno entered the courtroom, the reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps erupted from the gallery, several women screamed, and bailiff Robert Chen instinctively reached for his service weapon before Dr. Martinez raised a calming hand. "Everyone, please remain seated and calm," Judge O'Sullivan commanded, her gavel striking the bench with authority. "This proceeding will continue only if we maintain order." But Emma's reaction was entirely different from the rest of the courtroom. While grown men pressed themselves against the walls and mothers clutched their purses like shields, the 4-year-old girl stood up from her seat and began walking toward the enormous predator with the kind of fearless curiosity that only children possess. "Emma? No." Hank's voice cracked as he reached for his granddaughter, but she had already moved beyond his grasp. The courtroom held its collective breath as the tiny girl approached 600 pounds of wild animal with nothing but trust in her wide blue eyes. Bruno stopped moving the moment he saw Emma. Dr. Martinez later described it as the most remarkable display of animal intuition she had ever witnessed. The bear's posture immediately softened, his ears moving forward in a gesture of gentleness, and he lowered his massive head to Emma's level. Emma reached out with one small hand and placed it directly on Bruno's snout. The contact lasted only seconds, but in that moment, something extraordinary happened. Emma looked up at the bear's dark eyes and spoke her first words in 2 years. "Hello, Bruno," she whispered, her voice barely audible but crystal clear in the silent courtroom. "I know you're sad, too." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Bruno settled onto his haunches beside Emma, creating a living wall of fur and muscle that seemed to envelop the child in safety. Emma leaned against his side as naturally as if she had been doing it her entire life, her hand absently stroking his thick coat. Judge O'Sullivan felt tears welling in her eyes for the first time in 20 years on the bench. "My God," she whispered, forgetting her judicial composure. "She's speaking." But the moment of wonder was quickly shattered by defense attorney Marcus Webb's explosive objection. "Your Honor!" he shouted, leaping to his feet so violently that his chair toppled backward. "This is absolutely unacceptable. That child is in mortal danger from a wild predator. I demand that animal be removed from this courtroom immediately." The passion in Webb's voice surprised everyone, including his own legal team. Most attorneys would have objected on procedural grounds, but Webb's reaction seemed deeply personal, almost visceral in its intensity. "Mr. Webb," Judge O'Sullivan said sternly, "you will moderate your tone in my courtroom. The child appears to be in no danger whatsoever." "Appears?" Webb's voice cracked with what sounded like genuine terror. "Your Honor, that beast could kill her in seconds. We're witnessing child endangerment disguised as justice." Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell rose gracefully, her years of courtroom experience allowing her to recognize the significance of what they were witnessing. "Your Honor, this child hasn't spoken a word in 2 years. We're observing a breakthrough that medical professionals said might never happen. Emma is clearly comfortable and safe with Bruno." "Safe?" Webb's laugh was harsh and bitter. "There is no such thing as a safe wild animal, especially not a bear. They are killers by nature, destroyers of families." His words carried a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than professional obligation. Emma, still nestled against Bruno's side, turned to look at the arguing adults with confusion in her young eyes. But when her gaze fell on Marcus Webb, something shifted in her expression. For just a moment, her hand tightened in Bruno's fur, and the bear seemed to sense her tension, moving slightly to position himself more protectively around her. "Order!" Judge O'Sullivan's gavel rang out again. "Mr. Webb, you will present your objections calmly and professionally, or you will be held in contempt. This court will recess for 30 minutes while I consider the unprecedented nature of these proceedings." As the judge retreated to her chambers and the courtroom erupted in urgent whispers, Emma remained exactly where she was, safe in the shadow of her unlikely protector, finally ready to tell the world what she had seen on that terrible February night. When court reconvened after the 30-minute recess, Judge O'Sullivan's decision rang through the packed courtroom with the weight of judicial history. "After careful consideration," she announced, her Irish accent more pronounced under stress, "this court will allow the therapy animal to remain present during these proceedings. However, Dr. Martinez will maintain constant supervision, and any sign of distress from either the child or the animal will result in immediate termination of this experiment." Emma had spent the recess in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, never leaving Bruno's side. Dr. Martinez had watched in amazement as the child whispered constantly to the bear, her small hands gesturing as if she were telling him an elaborate story. For the first time since her mother's death, Emma seemed truly animated, her blue eyes bright with purpose rather than haunted by memories. "What is she telling him?" Hank had asked, his weathered face creased with wonder and worry in equal measure. "I believe," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "that she's sharing her memories with someone she trusts completely. Bruno represents safety to her in a way that we humans simply cannot." When they returned to the courtroom, Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell approached the witness area where Emma sat curled against Bruno's massive side. The bear's intelligent brown eyes tracked every movement in the courtroom, but he remained perfectly still, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "Emma," Sarah said gently, kneeling to the child's level, "can you tell us about the night your mama was hurt?" Emma's response was to turn toward Bruno and whisper something in his ear that no one else could hear. The bear's ear twitched, and he made a soft rumbling sound that seemed to encourage her. "Bruno knows," Emma said, her voice still quiet but growing stronger. "I told him about the bad man who came to Grandpa Hank's cabin." "Can you tell us what the bad man looked like?" Sarah asked, careful to keep her voice calm despite her racing heart. Emma nodded and began speaking to Bruno again, but this time her words were loud enough for the court reporter to capture. "He was really big, like you, Bruno, but scary. He had a mark on his arm like a snake, and he smelled like the medicine that makes Grandpa Hank sleep." The detail about Jake Morrison's distinctive tattoo and his alcohol problem sent ripples through the courtroom. These were facts that hadn't been made public, known only to law enforcement and those closest to the case. "What happened when the bad man came to the cabin?" Sarah continued. Emma's hand tightened in Bruno's fur, and the bear seemed to sense her distress, shifting slightly to provide more comfort. "Mama told me to play hide-and-seek in the closet. She said to stay hidden no matter what I heard." Emma's voice began to tremble. "But I looked through the little spaces in the door. I saw everything." Defense attorney Marcus Webb objected repeatedly during Emma's testimony, his agitation seeming to increase with every word the child spoke. "Your Honor, this is hearsay from a traumatized 4-year-old who's being influenced by an untrained wild animal." But Judge O'Sullivan overruled each objection, transfixed by the clarity and detail in Emma's account. The child described the layout of the cabin with perfect accuracy, remembered specific conversations between her mother and Jake Morrison, and even recalled the exact time on the digital clock in the bedroom. 8:47 p.m. "Bruno understands about Mama's being hurt," Emma said, looking up at the bear with profound trust. "His mama was hurt too, by another bad man with a gun, Doctor." Martinez confirmed that Emma had never been told about Bruno's backstory, making her knowledge of the bear's traumatic past inexplicable to everyone in the courtroom. Yet somehow, through their connection, the child and the bear had shared their deepest wounds. As Emma's testimony continued over the following days, her confidence grew stronger. She drew detailed pictures for the court, showing the exact position of furniture in the cabin, the broken fireplace poker that had been the murder weapon, and most chillingly, a perfect rendering of Jake Morrison's face, complete with the scar above his left eyebrow that he'd received in a bar fight years earlier. The breakthrough came on the 4th day of testimony when Emma suddenly stood up from her position beside Bruno and pointed toward the defense table. "That man talks like the other bad man," she said, her small finger aimed directly at Marcus Webb. The courtroom erupted in confusion. Webb's face went ashen, and he began stuttering objections that made no legal sense. "Your Honor, the child is clearly confused. I wasn't, this is preposterous." But Emma wasn't finished. She walked closer to Webb, Bruno following protectively behind her, and tilted her head as if listening to something only she could hear. "You were in the car," she said with chilling certainty. "You told the bad man where we were hiding. You said Mama was hiding something that could hurt you." The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Sarah Mitchell immediately requested a recess to investigate this new development, while Webb's objections became increasingly frantic and incoherent. During the investigation that followed, Emma's statements began to unravel a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Financial records showed payments from Webb's law firm to Jake Morrison dating back 6 months before Grace Thompson's murder. Phone records revealed multiple calls between Webb and Morrison in the days leading up to the attack, But the most damning evidence came from Emma herself. During a private session with Dr. Martinez and Bruno, she revealed that she had overheard part of a phone conversation her mother had with her friend Lisa the day before they fled to the cabin. "Mama said she found papers in Jake's truck," Emma told Bruno as Dr. Martinez recorded every word. "Papers that showed the bad lawyer man was stealing money from people. Mama said she was going to tell the police after she kept me safe." The papers Emma referenced were never found, presumably destroyed by Jake Morrison after the murder. But Emma's testimony provided the missing link that explained why Grace Thompson had to die. She hadn't just been a victim of domestic violence, she had been a witness to Marcus Webb's embezzlement scheme that had stolen millions from his law firm's clients. Webb's carefully constructed life began collapsing as investigators dug deeper into his finances and discovered a web of corruption that spanned years. His hatred of bears, which had seemed like a professional disagreement with the therapy program, was revealed to have much more sinister roots. The truth about Webb's son Tommy emerged during the investigation. The boy hadn't died in a random bear attack as Webb claimed, but during an illegal hunting expedition that Webb had organized on protected federal land. When Tommy was mauled and killed, Webb had covered up the illegal hunt and blamed the incident on a random bear encounter. The bear that killed Tommy was the same one whose mate had been poached, Bruno's mother. Emma's connection to Bruno suddenly made horrifying sense. They weren't just two trauma victims who had found comfort in each other. They were both victims of Marcus Webb's criminal enterprise, their mothers killed by the same network of corruption and violence. "Mama tried to tell someone about the bad papers," Emma explained to the court during her final day of testimony. "But the bad lawyer man found out. He sent the other bad man to stop her from talking." As Emma's story unfolded, the tight-knit community of Asheville was forced to confront the fact that one of their most respected citizens was actually a monster who had orchestrated multiple murders to protect his crimes. The case that had begun as a simple domestic violence murder had evolved into a federal investigation involving conspiracy, embezzlement, environmental crimes, and multiple homicides. But through it all, Emma remained steady in her testimony, her small hand never leaving Bruno's protective presence. The bear seemed to understand that he was more than a therapy animal. He was a guardian angel for a little girl who had found her voice through his silent strength. The bond between them had given Emma the courage to speak truths that would have remained buried forever, ensuring that justice would finally be served not just for her mother, but for Bruno's mother and all the other victims of Marcus Webb's decades-long reign of corruption and violence. The climax arrived on a gray Thursday morning when Jake Morrison finally took the witness stand in his own defense. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds gathering outside the courthouse to follow the proceedings on local news broadcasts. Morrison, a hulking man with dead eyes and calloused hands, had maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but Emma's detailed testimony had systematically destroyed his alibi. "I never hurt Grace," Morrison testified, his voice a gravelly whisper that barely carried to the back of the courtroom. "She was the mother of my child. I loved her." From her position beside Bruno, Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. She pressed herself deeper into the bear's thick fur, her small body trembling as she heard the voice that had haunted her nightmares for 2 years. Bruno sensed her distress instantly, his massive head turning toward Morrison with a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You're lying," Emma said suddenly, her clear voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "You hurt Mama. I saw you." Morrison's composure cracked. "That kid don't know what she's talking about," he snarled, his careful facade slipping to reveal the rage beneath. "She was hiding in a closet. She couldn't see nothing." "But I did see," Emma replied, standing up beside Bruno with a courage that left the courtroom breathless. I saw you hit Mama with the fire stick. I saw you looking for me, and I saw the other bad man waiting in the car." The mention of an accomplice sent shock waves through the gallery. Sarah Mitchell had suspected Webb's involvement based on Emma's earlier statements, but Morrison's reaction confirmed it. His face went pale, and he shot a panicked glance toward the defense table where Marcus Webb sat frozen in his chair. "There wasn't no other man," Morrison stammered, but his denial rang hollow even to his own ears. Emma turned toward Bruno and whispered something that only he could hear. The bear's response was to stand up, his massive frame creating an imposing wall between Emma and Morrison. Then Emma did something that no one expected. She walked directly toward the witness stand, Bruno following protectively behind her. "Emma, stay back," Judge O'Sullivan warned, but the child seemed to be operating on an instinct deeper than courtroom protocol. "You smell like the scared man," Emma said, stopping just a few feet from Morrison. "You smell like the night you hurt Mama." Morrison's reaction was explosive. He lunged forward in his chair, his face contorted with rage. "You little brat! You ruined everything!" The outburst was all Sarah Mitchell needed. "Your Honor, the defendant has just confessed to the presence of a child witness." But Morrison wasn't finished. His hatred, bottled up for 2 years of legal proceedings, finally erupted. "That monster should be put down," he screamed, pointing at Bruno. "Bears are killers! Ask Marcus what they did to his boy!" The slip was monumental. Morrison had just revealed knowledge of Webb's personal tragedy that he shouldn't have possessed unless they were working together. Webb's face went ashen as he realized his client had just destroyed both their defenses. "Order! Order!" Judge O'Sullivan's gavel rang out repeatedly as the courtroom erupted in chaos, but the drama was far from over. Marcus Webb, seeing his carefully constructed life collapsing around him, made a decision that would haunt Asheville forever. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small pistol, the same weapon he had used to kill the poacher who had threatened to expose his illegal hunting operation years earlier. "That bear killed my son!" Webb screamed, his professional demeanor completely shattered. "And now it's turned this whole town against decent people." The courtroom transformed into pandemonium. People screamed and dove for cover as Webb waved the gun wildly. Bailiff Chen drew his weapon, but couldn't get a clear shot with so many civilians in the line of fire. But Emma didn't run. Instead, she stepped in front of Bruno, her tiny frame attempting to shield 600 pounds of bear from the gun pointed at them. "You can't hurt my family anymore," she said, her voice carrying a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small. Bruno understood the threat immediately. His protective instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution and sharpened by his own traumatic past, took over. He reared up on his hind legs, his massive frame towering over the courtroom, and released a roar that shook the windows and sent paintings tumbling from the walls. The sound was primal, terrifying, and absolutely protective. It was the roar of a mother bear defending her cubs, of a guardian angel warning off evil, of justice itself finding its voice through the most unlikely champion. Webb fired twice in panic. The first shot went wide, shattering a window and sending glass cascading onto the floor. The second bullet grazed Bruno's shoulder, drawing blood but failing to stop the massive bear from placing himself between Emma and the gunman. "Drop your weapon!" Bailiff Chen shouted, finally having a clear shot as Bruno's protective positioning moved Emma out of the line of fire. But Webb was beyond reason. Years of suppressed guilt over his son's death, decades of criminal activity, and the humiliation of being exposed by a 4-year-old child had pushed him over the edge of sanity. "My boy is dead because of bears like that," Webb screamed, aiming for another shot. "And this whole town has lost its mind over a kid who talks to animals." The third shot never came. "Doctor." Martinez, acting on instinct she didn't know she possessed, tackled Webb from behind, sending them both crashing into the defense table. The gun skittered across the floor as Chen and two other deputies swarmed the struggling attorney. In the chaos that followed, Emma never left Bruno's side. Despite the blood streaming from his shoulder wound, the bear remained perfectly calm around the child, his gentle rumbling providing comfort in the midst of terror. "It's okay, Bruno," Emma whispered, her small hands examining his wound with the careful touch of someone who understood pain. "The bad men can't hurt us anymore." As paramedics rushed in to treat Bruno's injury and deputies dragged Webb away in handcuffs, the courtroom slowly returned to order. But everyone present knew they had witnessed something unprecedented. Not just the solving of a murder case, but the triumph of innocence over evil, of love over hatred, of truth over corruption. Judge O'Sullivan, her hands still shaking from the violence she had witnessed, looked down at Emma and Bruno and felt something she had never experienced in 40 years on the bench. This wasn't just justice, it was redemption, delivered by the most unlikely partnership in legal history. The trial was over, but the healing was just beginning. The tragedy struck just as justice seemed within reach. 3 days after the violent confrontation in the courtroom, Emma Grace Thompson lay unconscious in Asheville General Hospital, her small body connected to machines that beeped with mechanical precision through the sterile silence. The doctors said it was pneumonia brought on by the stress and trauma of the trial, but Hank Thompson knew better. His granddaughter was dying of a broken heart. "She keeps asking for Bruno," Hank whispered to Sarah Mitchell as they sat in the hospital waiting room. His weathered hands shook as he held a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Every time she wakes up, that's the first word out of her mouth. But they won't let him in here." Bruno was recovering from his gunshot wound at the local veterinary clinic under round-the-clock care from Dr. Martinez and her team. The bullet had missed vital organs, but the bear's depression was more concerning than his physical injury. He had stopped eating, barely responded to commands, and spent his days staring at the clinic door as if waiting for Emma to walk through it. "They're dying without each other," Dr. Martinez told Judge O'Sullivan during an emergency meeting in the judge's chambers. "I've never seen a bond this strong between a human and an animal. Emma's immune system is shutting down from grief, and Bruno is exhibiting signs of severe depression." The legal implications were staggering. The hospital's liability insurance didn't cover wild animals. The state health department had strict regulations about therapy animals in medical facilities, and half the town was still reeling from the courthouse shooting. But Judge O'Sullivan had presided over enough human tragedy to recognize a crisis that transcended legal technicalities. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb's arrest had triggered a federal investigation that was unraveling decades of corruption. FBI agents were combing through his law firm's files, discovering a network of environmental crimes, illegal hunting operations, and financial fraud that stretched across 3 states. The man who had presented himself as a pillar of the community was revealed to be one of the most prolific white-collar criminals in North Carolina's history. Jake Morrison, abandoned by his lawyer and facing life in prison, finally confessed to everything. In a tearful breakdown that shocked even seasoned investigators, he revealed how Webb had manipulated him for years, using his gambling debts and violent tendencies to eliminate threats to the attorney's criminal enterprise. Webb said Grace had papers that could destroy him, Morrison sobbed during his confession. He said if I didn't stop her from talking, he'd make sure I went to prison for all the other stuff I'd done for him. I never meant to kill her. I just wanted to scare her. But the confessions and legal victories meant nothing to Emma, who lay in her hospital bed growing weaker by the hour. Her fever had spiked to dangerous levels and the antibiotics weren't working. Dr. Patricia Williams, the pediatrician treating Emma, had exhausted every medical option available. In all my years of practice, Dr. Williams told the assembled group of adults who had become Emma's unlikely family, I've never seen a child so young lose the will to live so completely. She's giving up. The breaking point came on Sunday evening when Emma's heart rate dropped to critically low levels. Alarms blared through the pediatric ward as nurses rushed to stabilize the little girl who had captured the heart of an entire community. In the ICU, surrounded by the cold efficiency of modern medicine, Emma whispered a single word that broke everyone's heart. Bruno. Hank Thompson, a man who had survived combat in Vietnam and buried his only son, finally reached his limit. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "If my granddaughter is dying, she's going to die with her best friend beside her." Sarah Mitchell, who had prosecuted hundreds of cases but had never felt anything like the maternal bond she shared with Emma, made the phone call that would either save a little girl's life or end several careers. "Dr. Martinez," she said, "we need to bring Bruno to the hospital. Tonight." The logistics were a nightmare. Hospital administrators threatened lawsuits, insurance companies refused coverage, and state officials warned of licensing revocations. But Judge O'Sullivan, exercising her judicial authority in ways that would be debated in law schools for decades, issued an emergency order declaring Bruno an essential medical device for Emma's treatment. Sometimes, the judge told the assembled group of officials who opposed the plan, the law must bend to serve justice, and sometimes justice looks like a little girl who needs her friend. As word spread through Asheville that Bruno would be brought to the hospital, something extraordinary happened. The community that had been divided by the controversial trial united behind a single cause: saving Emma Grace Thompson. The tragedy that had seemed like an ending was about to become a beginning that would change everything. The truth that emerged in the investigation's final phase was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. As FBI forensic accountants dug deeper into Marcus Webb's financial records, they uncovered a conspiracy that reached back 15 years and involved victims across multiple states. But the most devastating revelation came from an unlikely source. Webb himself, broken and facing multiple life sentences, finally confessed to crimes that connected all the tragic threads of Emma and Bruno's story. "You want to know the truth?" Webb said during his final interrogation, his silver hair disheveled and his expensive suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit. "My son Tommy didn't die in a random bear attack. He died because of my greed, and I've been trying to cover it up ever since." The story Webb told shattered any remaining sympathy the community might have had for him. Tommy Webb had indeed been killed by a bear, but not during an innocent camping trip as his father had claimed. The 8-year-old boy had been with Webb during an illegal hunting expedition on federal land, part of a poaching operation that Webb had been running to supply exotic animal parts to wealthy collectors. "I was making millions selling bear gallbladders and paws to overseas buyers," Webb confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. "Tommy wasn't supposed to be there, but his babysitter canceled last minute. I thought it would be safe to bring him along." The bear that killed Tommy was a mother protecting her cubs that included Bruno. Webb's poaching team had already killed Bruno's father when the mother bear launched her desperate attack to save her babies. In the chaos that followed, Tommy was fatally mauled while Webb watched in horror, too paralyzed by shock to help his own son. "I could have saved him," Webb said, tears finally breaking through his composed facade. "But I was more worried about covering up the illegal hunt than helping Tommy. By the time I acted, it was too late." The cover-up that followed was elaborate and cruel. Webb used his legal connections to classify the incident as a random bear attack, ensuring that the mother bear and her cubs would be hunted down and killed by wildlife officials seeking to eliminate a dangerous animal. Bruno had survived only because Dr. Martinez's wildlife rescue team found him first, hidden in a cave where his dying mother had placed him. But Webb's crimes didn't end with his son's death. Consumed by guilt and a twisted need for revenge against the species he blamed for his loss, he began systematically targeting anyone who threatened his expanding criminal enterprise. Grace Thompson had stumbled onto evidence of his poaching operation when she noticed suspicious transactions in Jake Morrison's bank account, payments that Morrison had received for serving as muscle in Webb's illegal activities. Grace was supposed to be just another domestic violence case, Webb explained with chilling matter-of-factness. Morrison was already abusing her. I just convinced him to take it one step further to keep her from talking. The revelation that Grace Thompson had died not just as a victim of domestic violence, but as a witness to environmental crimes that had been ongoing for over a decade, added new dimensions to the tragedy. Emma had lost her mother because she was trying to protect wildlife, the same instinct that had led Emma to trust Bruno so completely. Dr. Martinez sat in stunned silence as she listened to the recording of Webb's confession. Bruno's entire family was destroyed by this man, she said, her voice breaking. And then Emma's family was destroyed by the same network of corruption. No wonder they understood each other so deeply. The forensic investigation revealed the full scope of Webb's environmental crimes. His poaching network had been responsible for the deaths of over 300 bears across the Southeast, including numerous endangered black bears and several instances of mother bears killed while protecting their cubs. The operation had generated over $15 million in illegal profits, money that Webb had used to fund his legitimate law practice and maintain his respectable facade. But perhaps the most heartbreaking discovery came when investigators found Webb's personal journals hidden in a safety deposit box under a false name. The entries revealed a man consumed by self-hatred and a twisted need to blame innocent animals for his own moral failures. "Every time I see a bear, I see Tommy's face," one entry read. "They're all killers. Every single one of them should be eliminated." Another entry, dated just 2 weeks before the trial began, was even more disturbing. "That little girl and her circus bear are making a mockery of everything I've worked for. If I can't destroy the animal legally, maybe I can find another way." The journal entries provided crucial evidence that Webb's actions in the courtroom had been premeditated. His plan to shoot Bruno hadn't been a spontaneous breakdown, but a calculated attempt to eliminate the witness who was helping to unravel his life's work of crime and deception. As the full truth emerged, the Asheville community was forced to confront the fact that their most respected attorney had been a sociopath hiding behind a veneer of respectability. Parents wondered how many times they had entrusted their legal matters to a man who was systematically destroying the natural world their children would inherit. But the revelations also brought unexpected healing. Emma's testimony, which had seemed like the desperate words of a traumatized child, was now recognized as the key that had unlocked one of the largest environmental crime cases in federal history. Her courage in speaking the truth had not only brought justice for her mother's murder, but had potentially saved hundreds of wild animals from future slaughter. The connection between Emma and Bruno took on an almost mystical quality as the full story emerged. Two orphans, created by the same network of violence and greed, had found each other across species lines and together had brought down the criminal empire that had destroyed their families. Jake Morrison, faced with the overwhelming evidence of Webb's manipulation and the lighter sentence offered in exchange for his cooperation, provided the final pieces of the puzzle. His testimony revealed how Webb had systematically recruited men with gambling debts, substance abuse problems, and violent tendencies to serve as enforcers for his various criminal enterprises. "He had this way of making you feel like you had no choice," Morrison said during his final confession. He'd say, "You're already a criminal, Jake. You might as well be a useful one." I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just another tool he used to hurt people. The investigation ultimately led to the arrest of 17 additional conspirators across 4 states, the seizure of over $30 million in illegal assets, and the establishment of a federal task force dedicated to combating wildlife trafficking in the Southeast. But for all the legal victories and recovered stolen money, the real triumph was simpler and more profound. Emma Grace Thompson and Bruno had proven that truth, no matter how small its voice, could topple even the most powerful and corrupt institutions. Their bond had become a symbol of justice that transcended species, showing that love and trust could overcome even the darkest human evil. The full truth was finally revealed, but the most important chapter of their story was still being written in a hospital room where a little girl lay fighting for her life. The resolution came not with fanfare, but with the quiet miracle of a little girl's laughter echoing through the halls of Asheville General Hospital at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Bruno had arrived under cover of darkness, transported in a specially modified ambulance while a convoy of police cars cleared the streets. The sight of a 600-pound black bear being wheeled through the hospital's emergency entrance on a reinforced gurney would have been comical under different circumstances, but everyone involved understood they were witnessing something sacred. Emma's reaction when she saw Bruno was immediate and profound. Her fever, which had been hovering at dangerous levels for days, began dropping within minutes of the bear's arrival. The cardiac monitors that had been alarming constantly settled into steady, healthy rhythms. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had been prepared to tell Hank Thompson that his granddaughter might not survive the night, instead found herself documenting what she would later call the most remarkable recovery in my 30 years of practice. "It's like watching someone come back from the dead," Dr. Williams whispered to Sarah Mitchell as they stood in the doorway watching Emma curl up against Bruno's massive side. The bear, despite his own healing wounds, had positioned himself carefully on the specially reinforced hospital bed, creating a living wall of warmth and security around the little girl who had become his entire world. The hospital room had been transformed into something that belonged more in a fairy tale than a medical facility. Hundreds of get-well cards from children across the country covered every available surface, many featuring crayon drawings of little girls and bears. The windowsill overflowed with stuffed animals, flowers, and handmade gifts from a community that had fallen in love with Emma's story. Judge Margaret O'Sullivan visited every day, often staying long past visiting hours to read stories to Emma or simply sit quietly watching the unprecedented bond between child and bear. "In 40 years on the bench," she told anyone who would listen, "I thought I'd seen every kind of family. But this little girl and this bear have taught me that love doesn't follow our human rules." Hank Thompson had aged a decade in the week since the trial began, but Emma's recovery brought color back to his weathered cheeks and hope back to his eyes. He spent his days in the hospital room, telling both Emma and Bruno stories about Grace's childhood, about the cabin in the mountains where she had played as a little girl, and about the dreams she had harbored for her daughter's future. "Your mama would be so proud of you, little bug," Hank said one afternoon as Emma practiced writing her letters while leaning against Bruno's side. "She always said you were going to change the world. I just don't think she knew you'd do it before you turned 5. Sarah Mitchell found herself visiting the hospital not as a prosecutor but as something approaching family. Her successful career had always felt hollow compared to the fulfillment she found in Emma's presence. The little girl had awakened maternal instincts that Sarah thought she had sacrificed forever on the altar of professional ambition. "Miss Sarah," Emma said one day, looking up from a picture book she was reading to Bruno, "will you help me write a letter to all the other mamas who got hurt by bad men?" The request led to the establishment of the Grace Thompson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting children who had witnessed domestic violence. Emma insisted that Bruno serve as the foundation's official mascot, and their story became a powerful tool for encouraging other young witnesses to find their voices. Dr. Rebecca Martinez documented every aspect of Emma and Bruno's recovery, her research forming the foundation for what would become known as the Asheville Protocol for Animal-Assisted Therapy in Trauma Cases. Universities across the country requested copies of her findings, and the National Institute of Mental Health provided funding for expanded studies based on Emma and Bruno's remarkable bond. The legal aftermath of the case continued for months. Marcus Webb was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole on multiple murder charges, plus an additional 40 years for his environmental crimes. Jake Morrison received 25 years in exchange for his cooperation, but would ultimately serve only 15 with good behavior and continued assistance to federal investigators pursuing other aspects of Webb's criminal network. The civil settlements were substantial. Webb's seized assets, totaling over $30 million, were distributed among his victims and their families. Emma's trust fund, managed by Sarah Mitchell and overseen by Judge O'Sullivan, would ensure her education and security for life. But more importantly, the foundation established in Grace Thompson's name would help thousands of other children find their voices in the aftermath of trauma. Bruno's recovery paralleled Emma's in ways that amazed medical professionals from both human and veterinary fields. His shoulder wound healed completely, leaving only a small scar that Emma would trace with her finger while telling him stories. But the psychological healing was even more remarkable. The depressed, traumatized bear who had arrived at the hospital was transformed into a confident, gentle giant whose presence could calm the most frightened child. The experimental therapy program that had begun as a desperate last resort became a model for the nation. Asheville General Hospital became the first medical facility in the country to officially incorporate large therapy animals into its pediatric trauma unit. Children from across the Southeast were referred to the program, and the waiting list stretched for months. Emma became the program's unofficial ambassador, helping other traumatized children learn to trust Bruno and the other therapy animals that joined the program. Her natural empathy and hard-won wisdom made her an effective bridge between the adult world of doctors and social workers and the frightened children who needed healing. "Bruno helped me find my voice," Emma would tell new patients, "and now we can help you find yours too." The media attention continued for months, but the Thompson family learned to navigate it carefully. Emma's privacy was fiercely protected by Judge O'Sullivan's court orders and Sarah Mitchell's legal expertise. When reporters were allowed access, it was always on Emma's terms, usually involving her desire to help other children or promote wildlife conservation. The most touching moment came 6 months after the trial, when Emma was invited to address the North Carolina State Legislature about children's rights and animal welfare. Standing at the podium with Bruno beside her, wearing a tiny business suit that had been specially tailored for the occasion, Emma delivered a speech that would be quoted in law journals and ethics textbooks for years to come. "Bruno and I both lost our mamas to bad people," she said, her clear voice carrying through the hushed chamber. "But we found each other, and we found our voices. Every child deserves to have someone who listens, even if that someone has 4 paws and fur." The legislation that resulted from Emma's testimony, known as Emma's Law, established new protections for child witnesses and expanded the use of therapy animals in legal proceedings. It was signed by the governor in a ceremony on the courthouse steps in Asheville, with Emma and Bruno as the guests of honor. As autumn returned to the Blue Ridge Mountains, Emma started kindergarten at Asheville Elementary School. Bruno couldn't accompany her to classes, but he was always waiting when she got off the school bus, and their afternoon sessions at the hospital had become a highlight for staff and patients alike. The cabin where Grace Thompson had died was demolished and replaced with a memorial garden dedicated to domestic violence victims. Emma planted the first tree, a young oak that she named Mama's Tree, while Bruno watched protectively from nearby. The garden became a place of healing for the entire community, a reminder that beauty could grow from even the darkest tragedies. Dr. Martinez often marveled at how far they had all come from that first controversial day when Bruno had entered the courtroom. "We thought we were conducting an experiment in animal therapy," she told colleagues at a national conference. "What we discovered was a new understanding of love, healing, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit." On the second anniversary of Grace Thompson's murder, Emma and Bruno visited her grave for the first time since the funeral. Emma placed fresh flowers on the headstone while Bruno sat quietly beside her, as if he understood the solemnity of the moment. "Mama, Bruno and I are okay now," Emma whispered to the carved granite marker. "We're helping other kids like me, and we're making sure the bad people can't hurt anyone else. I think you would be proud of us." As they walked back to Hank's truck, Emma's small hand resting on Bruno's massive head, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the mountain cemetery. For the first time since that terrible February night, Emma Grace Thompson was truly at peace. The little girl who had once been too traumatized to speak had found her voice and used it to change the world. And beside her, every step of the way, walked the bear who had taught her that love could triumph over any darkness, that healing was possible even after the worst trauma, and that sometimes the most unlikely friendships could move mountains. Their story had begun with tragedy, but it ended with hope, healing, and the unshakable bond between two souls who had saved each other from despair and discovered that together they could make the world a safer place for everyone who came after them. Sometimes the most powerful voices come from the smallest speakers, and the deepest healing flows from the most unexpected sources. Emma and Bruno's story reminds us that love doesn't follow our human rules. It transcends species, survives trauma, and transforms tragedy into triumph. In a world that often feels divided and broken, their bond shows us what's possible when we choose trust over fear, when we listen to voices that others dismiss, and when we believe that even the most wounded hearts can heal. Judge O'Sullivan discovered that 40 years of experience couldn't compare to the wisdom of a 4-year-old girl who refused to give up on justice. Sarah Mitchell learned that the family she'd always wanted was waiting in service to others. Hank Thompson found that his granddaughter's courage could heal his own war-torn soul. And Bruno proved that sometimes our greatest protectors come in forms we never expected. Their story teaches us that it's never too late to find your voice, never too late to form life-changing connections, and never too late to turn your pain into purpose. Every ending can become someone else's beginning when we choose love over fear. What unexpected friendship has changed your life? Have you ever found healing through helping others heal? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've turned challenges into blessings.